Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us for the GTM News Show. I got a special guest today, Rosalyn, Santa Elena. Thanks for joining me, Rosalyn.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Me too. The reason why I brought Rosalyn on was I've been following her work in the RevOps world for a little while now on LinkedIn. I've taken one of your classes through Pavilion and learned a lot from you in regards to RevOps and love to kind of dive deep into that. So before we jump in, I would love to RevOps is a newer term. I love, maybe in your own words, Rosalyn, define for us how you defined RevOps.
Yeah. So definitely a newer term, I think the last couple of years, but as I always tell people, it's not a new function, right? I mean, operations has existed for as long as sales has existed, as long as we've been trying to get revenue. But from my perspective, revenue operations, when people ask me, what's the definition? To me, it's really the infrastructure to support your end-to-end revenue process, right? So if you think about people, process, technology, data, insights, enablement, as well as strategy, right? And that's really revenue operations. It's that infrastructure to help you drive alignment, efficiencies, and optimization across all of those different, pillars, if you will, really aligned to your customer life cycle. Right. So it's top of funnel marketing, interest, all the way through a prospect to becoming a customer. And especially in SaaS, as we know, when they become a customer, that first time they sign the paper, that's just the beginning, right, of the relationship. So all of that post sales activity, driving customer success, driving expansions and renewals within your customer base, that's sort of that entire customer life cycle that RevOps supports.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Man, we could go off 4 or 5 things stuck out there. The one thing actually I think would be interesting for the audience is, I guess, why do you think RevOps became a thing?
Yeah. So I think in the very early on, so I've been doing operations, kind of leading teams for about 22 years. I hate to say that. When I say that, I'm feel so old, but I mean, for a long time. So, but I definitely seen a huge evolution. Right. And I think the last maybe 5 to 10 years, I think we've really seen operations kind of come to the forefront. Right. In the past, it was more of a support function, kind of working in the back, the back office, helping to support marketing and sales and post sales as well. But I think that, with just a number of factors. I think one, with the rise of SaaS, right, and sort of this recurring revenue model has given rise to, needing a stronger infrastructure to support that entire customer journey. That's really a loop, right, continuous, as well as just the explosion of technology, right? You think about how much tech is out there. I mean, there's literally, multiple pieces of technology for every single part, right, of the funnel for everyone to use. I think there was a survey recently that said, I think the average salesperson, uses 23, I want to say, tools, different apps just to do their job. And so think about managing all of that technology and keeping it in sync, right, with each other. So I think that's a big part of it. The other thing I would say is just the explosion of data as well, from, the importance of having the right insights at the right time is a real driving force for having a really strong operational infrastructure, because we're inundated with data, right? But it's great to gather data, but it's about what is the data telling me to go do next, right? Making that data actionable. And that's definitely a part of the RevOps purview. And then the other thing I would say that has probably made it a lot more complex too, which required sort of this rise of RevOps, is around just that customer journey. We think about, being, us even as consumers, right? You think about how we're inundated with information, but at the same time, we can go access information anywhere, right? We can find out all we want to know about a particular vendor or a particular solution before we ever have a conversation, right, with anybody at that company. So us being more informed means that we're also more demanding, right? We expect a lot more from our relationships with our vendor. And we're not looking for someone to, sell us a tool or sell us features or a product, but really looking for somebody to be that partner and, value driven kind of relationship, right? That's what we're looking for, someone to share best practices and tell us how to solve our real world problems, right? And be that partner to help us be successful in our own business. And so with that more demand, drives that more kind of puts the customer experience top, kind of front and center, which requires, again, really strong operational support and infrastructure to be able to optimize and, kind of provide that frictionless customer experience. So I think, maybe to sum it up, I think it's just there's so much complexity. Technology, the information, data, the buying experience, the customer experience has become so critical to revenue success that this has kind of led its way to this rise of this revenue operations function to be able to be that body that really takes that holistic view of all of those things and puts it together in a solid infrastructure to be able to support that revenue engine.
Love it. Thanks for sharing. I think I took two things I took away from that. Number one is the customer journey, the customer experience. And I think folks that are listening are probably familiar with marketing operations and sales operations and just operations in general, which you hinted at. And I think what I like about RevOps is I think those operational departments are really focused at one point in time. Marketing is focusing on maybe top of funnel, sales is maybe focusing on in the opportunity stage or nurturing. Whereas RevOps has the privilege of looking at the entire journey. And you even said post sale, right? Looking at as that's such an important aspect for reoccurring revenue. And the other thing you mentioned was just revenue in general. And I think folks that are looking at, once again, the whole journey, optimizing for the whole journey versus just looking at, hey, I'm just optimizing for leads. Maybe marketing is optimizing for versus sales is optimizing for close one. Customer success is optimizing for retention and expansion. I love that. I'd love to hear from your perspective, especially in the market we're in, right? Everyone's talking about efficiency and especially in the SaaS world and reoccurring revenue world. Where do you see RevOps having the biggest impact when it comes to just improving efficiency and finding, and maybe if you have some anecdotal stories of some really cool ways you've seen RevOps just improve overall growth efficiency?
Yeah. I think that's another big driver, right? People are, companies are trying to do more with less. We talk about doing better with less and really optimizing for better outcomes. We talk a lot about, what's working, what's not, figuring out, what's coming around the corner and avoiding those blind spots. And I think that's where revenue operations, sort of the power of RevOps is really unlocked or unleashed. Right? Because I think the revenue operations, by being that holistic body, kind of looking at that entire customer journey from that lens of people, process, tech, data and insights, is able to kind of glean the information that you really need to be able to understand what's happening in your business. I think because we've seen sort of this rise of RevOps, especially the last couple of years, because if you think about the last 3 years have been just crazy, right? The market's been up and down, up and down. It's like we're all kind of dizzy from just the volatility of the market. But I think it really highlighted the fact that companies who had strong operations were the ones who had the information available to help them understand, how and when and where they should pivot and do things differently to accommodate the market. And then where they're able to actually go and execute, right? As an operator, you're looking at the strategy and the insights, but you're also kind of swivel chair and have to be able to go and actually operationalize and execute those changes. And so, companies that are really leveraging a true revenue operations structure are the ones who can now unlock those insights to be able to help them understand, incrementally all along the customer journey, what's working and go and lean in and go do more of that versus what's really not working or not yielding as much of, a return or as much impact. And so to step back and stop doing those things that, aren't yielding the best results. And that goes back to sort of that efficiency piece, right? So some of those things around, whether it's people, right? Optimizing what people are working on and where they're spending their time and efforts, or it's optimizing money, right? In terms of resources, like from a marketing perspective, you have less budget, you want to spend on the things that are actually going to yield positive results. But how do you know that, right? How do you know what's working and what's not? That's where operations really can help take the data, glean the insights, and then make recommendations.
Very cool. Very cool. I love that. Is there any, we mentioned, different aspects of, revenue org and optimizing for different areas. Is there specific, I'm just curious, like in the RevOps teams you've seen or you've built, or you've been a part of, what are maybe even some KPIs that the RevOps team kind of holds themselves accountable for? So when, as an executive is looking at maybe building out a RevOps team, or it seems like they could be pointed in 1,000 different directions, maybe 1,000,000 different directions. How do you direct a RevOps team or somebody that's going to be starting this role to, how do you measure them against success?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, we all want more revenue, right? We want more revenue and we want it faster, right? So I always think about, as a RevOps leader, my role is really to drive whatever that top line goal is, whether that is growth or it's retention, which is one thing that we didn't touch on too much, but around the kind of the post-sale side, the customer side, revenue operations also plays a big role there, right? Especially in this market around, we know how hard it is to acquire net new customers. We know we're going to acquire less of those in this type of market. So really diving deeper on your customer base and helping to understand, what value, deliver value to your customers, right? And why do they buy, and, making sure that they're successful, but also helping to flag risk around churn or downsell potential and getting ahead of that, right? And then also identifying white space for potential growth within your customer base. So kind of going back to just KPIs for RevOps, I think our goals should always be aligned to whatever the go-to-market objectives are, right? So if that is growth or retention or net new logos or whatever those, I think everyone just wants more revenue, but whatever those goals are, right? Our goals should be tied to that. And how do we do that, right? Is around optimizing efficiencies, making sure that we're doing all the things incrementally across the funnel that we could be doing to improve success in those areas. I think people try to kind of boil the ocean and say, okay, well, we should just all be tied to this one metric, but it's all about those changes that you can make, the tweaks that you make that give you 1% better conversion, maybe 2% better, win rates, or whatever those incremental changes are that add up at the end to, driving that outcome that you're trying to achieve. So, what I recommend for RevOps is really to look at across your funnel and where are the places that, there's pain, or where are those places that, in every place, I think across the funnel around where you touch your customer or buyer, there's opportunity to improve, right? Maybe it's just a better handoff between like a BDR and a sales team and improving that lead time. Maybe it's better lead scoring to be able to make sure that we're getting the right leads to our sales team, right? There could be better handoffs between sales and customer success around making sure that the right information is available to the sales team to provide that really seamless experience for the customer when they get onboarded, right? And then we start to implement and start to help them realize kind of that, reduce that time to value, right? So there's a lot of incremental changes that I think, incremental things that RevOps could be doing that we should be holding ourselves accountable for. But ultimately, every company is going to be at a different size, stage, and different selling motion and different needs. So making that tailored to what your company is trying to achieve is really important.
Thanks, Rosalyn. Super helpful. I'm curious. I'm wondering what type of person succeeds in a RevOps type of role. What type of background? Because from my experience, it seems like it has a variety of backgrounds in it. And the reason why I mainly ask is for lots of reasons. But I think the biggest thing is from what I'm understanding, is RevOps kind of sits outside of, obviously, maybe outside or inside, depending on the org, but they're definitely coming with suggestions to marketing to be like, hey, here's how I think we can tweak, our form conversions by 1%, or sales, here's how we can, get folks from stage 1 to stage 2 faster. What type of person does that well? And then how do they handle, that very, maybe sometimes challenging conversation?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think from a revenue operations, like when you're trying to hire for RevOps or trying to look for talent in revenue operations, I think that there's definitely a lot of the technical experience and knowledge that needs to come, right? Obviously, you need to be well versed in the business, understand go-to-market motions, understand how people, routes to market, understand all of that. And there's sort of that business side of it. But even more importantly, I think the most important probably skill, like if I could only pick one skill to be really good at, if I wanted to be an ops leader, it would be around the communication, right? And it's not about like being able to present or having, being able to speak or write well. It's about the ability to influence, build rapport, and drive consensus, right? Because a lot of our role is to influence without authority, right? Like you said, we sit kind of outside of that world, but we are trying to juggle and manage so many different personalities, right? Different stakeholders with strong opinions a lot of times, right? You think about marketing and sales and finance and even product. And they come from different positions, right? Where what they are, looking to do and what they value is going to be different. So our ability to communicate effectively and bring everybody along for the journey is more important, I think, than anything else, right? Building that advocacy, driving buy-in, and then being able to influence others to understand the why is like the most important. I think the one single most important skill that we can have. And then there's a whole laundry list of other things, right? Because there's also we have this, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this, that I think we have this unique personality where we are both strategic and tactical at the same time, right? Being able to kind of understand the high level strategy of what we're trying to achieve. But then immediately, like my brain goes to start breaking things out into little, bite-sized chunks, right? On how we're actually going to go and execute. So being able to do both constantly. And I think the smaller the company, the more, the faster rate of change and all of that. So you are bouncing back and forth between that being strategic and being tactical all day long.
I love it. Well, I think that character quality of the ability to influence and collaborate and get buy-in. And I think if I were to have that for any skill set, I would focus on the beginning of my career would have been that. Because I think any job values from that, any career, but especially I think to your point, RevOps, with it being such a nuanced, nuanced role. And I love how you encapsulated the strategic and tactical, because the RevOps, from my understanding, is you're trying to execute the overall go-to-market vision and approach, right, on one level, which is very strategic, very high level, very 30,000 feet up in the air. But then you also have to get into the nitty gritty when you when you click the button, does it work, right? Does the systems work? And then you're also optimizing down to the nitty gritty of the journey and the experience. And that is like, especially the experience side, the tactical side of like making that experience just be fluid and like having empathy towards your consumer, your customer, to know how to, work with them. And maybe even that influence, now that we're talking about it, for the internal influence also helps with the customers too. And actually being able to know how to drive change internally, but then also in the customer journey.
Yeah.
Super cool.
A while back in my career, of one of my managers actually said that to me, and I've shared this before, but I think it's important. It's just that he told me, it's like my job was to understand the customer better than anyone else. Right. And I think it really, I think operations, we tend to focus a lot on the internal and thinking about, our internal customers, which is really important too, but always having that perspective on like what's best for the customer and what does that customer experience look like. And that goes for any role really, but always think about your customer first, and then everything else should be driving towards that. Right.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. And even, you haven't said one time the revenue journey. You've said the customer journey. And I think that's maybe even hitting. It's important, obviously, to optimize for revenue, but even the sense of finding what's scalable from a revenue standpoint internally may not actually be what's best for the customer. And so that experience, I really love that as far as optimizing for the customer experience, not just the sales process, right? Or what our journey is, right? And you see a big push away from that, moving towards, hey, where is the customers? Because it's changed so much. Like you mentioned earlier, people have so much more information and it's rapidly changing. We have a few more minutes left, and I'd love to cover just, is there any kind of high level stages, kind of mature? Is there like a maturity model for RevOps that people can look to as far as like, hey, what stage am I in? What can I look towards? How can I improve?
Yeah, absolutely. I get asked the question a lot about, do I need revenue operations? When do I need it? What do I need? And I think that every company, depending on what stage they're in, what their RevOps looks like is going to be very different. Right. And I think so there's definitely a maturity model, because just like anything else, as your company starts to mature, your product development, your sales team, right, your marketing efforts are going to evolve along with that. And so very similar, story for revenue operations, right? Do you need a full-blown RevOps department, on day one? Absolutely not, right? But I think that you should start thinking about revenue operations as early as possible, and then start to focus mainly on, if you think about the insights and the data and some of that infrastructure, whether that's tech stack or, reporting or just process, right? To me, process is like the key before tech, before anything else, right? Is you need to have process, because you can start to build repeatability, which will help you scale. And in any event, it's going to be iterative, right? We all know that change is constant and it's going to continue to change, but you need to start laying out some of that foundation, right? If you think about building a house, you got to start laying out start mixing that cement, right? Start laying out some of it and get ahead of it. So the sooner you do that. But as the company, as the operation starts to mature, then you're going to layer in more, not just roles, but more functionality, right? Because instead of just gathering data and laying out a CRM, and starting to do some of those ongoing meetings and such that you need to have that cadence, you're going to start to have deeper insights, right? You're going to have more process. It's going to be more scalable because you're going to have more people involved, right? You're going to have more salespeople, you're going to have more marketers, you're going to have more customer success folks once you have customers. So definitely there's a maturity model around building as you scale, similar to, I guess, no different from how you're building out a sales team, but it's more about thinking about doing it early and starting to build, and everything is iterative, right? But I think what's really important from that is making sure that you're building for today, but always an eye on the future, right? Because so many startups I see is like they build something and then it's only for today without thinking about what they need 12 months down the road, and they end up having to tear things down and rebuild because haven't built it the right way.
Super cool. Thanks for sharing, Rosalyn. I think we'll end it on that. I love that. Build it for today, but keep your eye on tomorrow. That's a good little one-liner. I like that. Thanks so much for coming on. How can folks connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. So LinkedIn is probably the best place. And as you mentioned, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So definitely follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me. Take a look at our website, the RevOpsCollective.com. There's definitely lots of information. I share a lot of RevOps content there as well as if anybody needs any help, always reach out. I'm always happy to help.
Rosalyn, thanks so much. It was great chatting with you. Revenue operations, I think, is the future, similar to terms like go-to-market. He's looking at the entire journey, looking at the entire revenue generation for the customer, internal, but also for the customer, and how do we optimize that, the people, process, and technology.
Yeah.
Love it, Rosalyn. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you around.
Bye.
Bye.